Harry Houdini could escape from anything. Handcuffs, straitjackets, nailed-shut packing crates dropped into freezing rivers. His entire career, his literal survival, was built on one obsession: seeing through deception, reverse engineering illusions, never being fooled. He was the ultimate skeptic. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, the man who built the most logical, evidence-driven fictional mind ever conceived, the most rigorously analytical brain in all of literature. And yet Conan Doyle, the architect of pure deductive reasoning, stubbornly and passionately believed in fairies, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept. He literally wrote a whole book defending photographs of paper cutouts of fairies. And Houdini, the man who spent decades debunking spiritualists, spent his final years desperately believing he could communicate with the dead. Two undeniable geniuses, two men who defined what it meant to be brilliant in their era, both completely, catastrophically fooled. Now today we are digging into David Robson's book, The Intelligence Trap. We are pulling from Keith Stanovich's cognitive research on bias blind spots and rationality quotients, Philip Tetlock's work on superforecasting, and a whole body of psychological research on dogmatism and belief revision. Our mission is to investigate this profound, almost terrifying paradox: failures that happen not despite intelligence, but failures that are actually caused by intelligence. We are looking at the specific mechanisms by which a brilliant mind uses its immense horsepower to drive itself straight off a cliff. And let me speak directly to you listening right now. If you have ever been the smartest person in a room, if you are highly educated, if you rely heavily on deep expertise to make a living, this episode is specifically for you. The trap we are talking about today does not catch people who think they are average. It catches people who have very good reasons to believe they are exceptional, because the prerequisites for this trap are high cognitive ability and deep subject matter expertise. Without those two things, you honestly are not vulnerable to the specific blind spots we are about to unpack. It is like a superhero whose greatest power is simultaneously their fatal weakness. The very thing that makes them formidable is the exact mechanism that destroys them. So, what exactly is the intelligence trap? Are we saying that being smart is actually bad? No, not at all. Intelligence is a massively useful tool. But to understand the trap, we have to look at the fundamental disconnect between intelligence, what we measure as IQ, and rationality. Cognitive scientists like Keith Stanovich refer to rationality as RQ, the rationality quotient, and the research introduces a specific term for this disconnect: dysrationalia. Dysrationalia, like dyslexia but for rational thinking, is defined as the inability to think and behave rationally despite having adequate or even exceptional intelligence. Robson uses a brilliant analogy that makes this very mechanical. Imagine the human brain as a car. Intelligence, your raw processing power, your memory, your ability to solve complex abstract puzzles, that is the engine. Education and expertise are the fuel. They put your thinking in motion. So a high IQ person with a PhD is basically a Ferrari with a full tank of premium gas. But simply adding a more powerful engine and higher octane fuel does not help you drive safely. What keeps you on the road is the steering wheel, the brakes, the GPS, the control systems. In the human mind, the steering wheel is rationality, the capacity for counterfactual thinking, self-reflection, cognitive flexibility. If you have a massive engine but a defective steering wheel, you are not going to win the race. You are just going to hit the wall faster, with much more destructive force. Now let's ground this with a historical study that should completely change how you think about IQ. Lewis Terman's termites. Back in the early 20th century, a psychologist named Lewis Terman decided to track children with extraordinarily high IQs. His goal was to prove that raw intelligence was the ultimate predictor of a highly successful, world-changing life. He scoured California schools and found these absolute prodigies. They became known as the termites. These kids were off the charts. People like Beatrice and Sarah Ann, who scored an IQ of 192. For context, Einstein is estimated to have been around 160. Terman assumed these children were going to grow up to be the titans of the 20th century, Nobel laureates, presidents, historic inventors. But what actually happened? Terman tracked them for decades, and the results were completely underwhelming. They were generally healthy, they held decent jobs, but they did not conquer the world. Beatrice, with her 192 IQ, ended up dabbling in real estate and local politics. Sarah Ann lived a semi-nomadic life, never settling into a major career. None of the termites won a Nobel Prize. Now here is where it gets wild. Terman actually tested 2 boys during his initial screening who did not make the cut. Their IQs were not deemed high enough to join this elite group. He rejected them. Those 2 boys were Luis Alvarez and William Shockley. Both grew up to win Nobel Prizes in physics. Shockley co-invented the transistor, which is the foundation of the entire modern digital world. Terman rejected the kid who gave us the information age because his engine did not test as powerful enough. And then there is Kari Mullis, a man who did win a Nobel Prize in chemistry for inventing PCR, polymerase chain reaction, the technology that allows us to amplify DNA, a foundational pillar of modern biology. Mullis was undeniably, staggeringly brilliant, yet later in life, he held some of the most bizarre, unscientific beliefs imaginable. He denied that HIV causes AIDS. He believed in astrology. He claimed to have had encounters with glowing alien-like creatures. He expressed serious doubts about climate change and ozone depletion. A Nobel Prize-winning chemist, applying almost zero evidence-based reasoning outside of his extremely narrow lane. Does our testing system miss this? How do IQ tests, GREs, Mensa exams, all of it, completely fail to measure whether someone is actually a rational thinker? Because those tests are designed to measure abstract reasoning in a highly artificial environment. When you sit down to take an IQ test, you are placed in a quiet room, handed a booklet, and essentially told, use your deepest, most analytical thinking right now. You are primed for it. You are cued to engage your heavy cognitive machinery. But real life does not work that way. In real life, there is no proctor. No one rings a bell to warn you that you are about to make a catastrophic medical diagnosis, or a terrible financial decision, or fall for a conspiracy theory. Real life does not tell you to stop relying on your gut. Traditional intelligence tests measure capacity, not the inclination to actually use it, and that distinction is everything. So why does a brilliant mind like Kari Mullis apply the same rigorous thinking he used in the lab to chemistry, but not to everything else? To answer that, we have to look at the biological reality of the brain itself. And this is where the concept of cognitive miserliness comes in. Your brain makes up roughly 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your body's energy. Deep, effortful, analytical thinking is physically exhausting. It burns glucose. It generates heat. From an evolutionary standpoint, spending energy on thinking is a luxury you cannot afford when you are trying to survive a famine or escape a predator. That evolutionary bottleneck is exactly why cognitive scientists talk about the dual process theory of the brain. 2 operating systems, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive and emotional. It operates in milliseconds. It costs almost no energy. System 2 is the slow, analytical, deliberate thinking, the heavy engine. Because System 2 is so energetically expensive, human beings evolved to be cognitive misers. We are biologically programmed to default to System 1 whenever possible, to conserve energy, to take the shortcut. We are at our core lazy geniuses. And here is the thing, even with an IQ of 160, your brain is still biologically motivated to avoid using it if it can get away with a quick intuitive guess. Let me prove this to you right now with something called the Cognitive Reflection Test, the CRT. It is a test designed specifically to catch the lazy brain in action. Here is the famous bat and ball problem. Listen closely. A baseball bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your brain almost violently wants to say 10 cents. It feels so right. $1 plus 10 cents equals $1.10. It snaps into place perfectly. But if you actually force your System 2 engine to turn on and check the math, something different happens. If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, the bat costs $1.10. That makes the total $1.20, not $1.10. The intuitive answer is completely wrong. The real answer is that the ball costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05. Now, what is fascinating about that problem is not just the math, it is what Daniel Kahneman calls WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. When your System 1 brain encountered that problem, it performed a quiet magic trick. It took a difficult algebraic equation and unconsciously swapped it out for a much simpler subtraction problem. $1.10, subtract $1, give you 10 cents. Done. The research calls this attribute substitution, the bait and switch. Your brain replaces a hard question with an easy one, and it does it so smoothly you never notice it happening. And this is not just a parlor trick. It happens in life or death situations. Look at Dr. Archie Cochrane. Cochrane is a legend in medicine. He is essentially the father of evidence-based medicine. The Cochrane Library, which houses the gold standard of medical reviews, is literally named after him. The man was a titan of medical rationality, and yet when he himself started suffering from severe abdominal pain and weight loss, his System 1 brain instantly formed a narrative, cancer. It just felt intuitively correct. The story made sense. He was so convinced by his own intuitive diagnosis that he ignored other possibilities, and his doctors, intimidated by his immense expertise, simply went along with it. He misdiagnosed himself because the narrative was smooth. The bait and switch happened. Instead of asking, what does the data actually say, his brain asked, does this story feel like cancer? He ended up having a totally treatable condition, celiac disease. But his expertise almost killed him because it allowed his System 1 brain to confidently skip the hard work. Now that leads directly into something called the earned dogmatism effect. Research by psychologist Victor Attati found that the more expert someone feels, the more closed-minded they become. Here is how they tested it. They gave people a trivia test. Half the group received extremely easy questions, making them feel highly knowledgeable and successful. The other half received impossibly difficult questions, making them feel ignorant. Right afterward, both groups were presented with scenarios requiring them to consider opposing viewpoints on a controversial issue. The group primed to feel like experts, the ones who aced the easy trivia, were significantly less willing to engage with opposing arguments. Attati called it normative entitlement. Normative entitlement. That is a chilling phrase. It means they felt they had earned the right to be dogmatic. Because they had proven their intelligence, their brain quietly told them, you do not need to do the hard work of considering the other side. You are the smart one in the room. You can trust your intuition. So let me ask you a direct question right now. Where in your own life have you earned enough credibility in your own eyes to stop actually thinking? Maybe you have been doing your job for 15 years. Maybe you read 5 books a week. Maybe you are the go-to person for advice in your friend group. Where are you running on the fumes of your own reputation? Because the trap does not feel like dogmatism when it is happening. It just feels like justified confidence. And it is exactly that feeling of justified confidence that leads us to the darker, more active side of the intelligence trap. Because cognitive miserliness is just about the brain being lazy. But what happens when the brain decides to actually spend the energy, turn on that massive System 2 engine, and think incredibly hard, specifically to avoid the truth? This is where intelligence stops being a tool for discovering reality and becomes a weapon for protecting your ego. This brings us to Keith Stanovich's research into the bias blind spot. Most people are familiar with cognitive biases, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, the sunk cost fallacy, but the bias blind spot is the meta-bias. It is the psychological phenomenon where you can easily and accurately spot how biased other people are, while remaining completely blind to those exact same biases operating in your own mind. It is the classic I am objective, you are biased mindset, We see our own reasoning as a pure window into reality. We see everyone else's reasoning as distorted by their emotions or their background. Now, logically, you would assume that smarter, more cognitively sophisticated people would have a smaller bias blind spot. If you have a high IQ, if you ace the cognitive reflection test, you should be better at spotting your own flaws. That is the assumption our entire educational system is built on. But the research reveals something that should stop you cold. Stanovich ran exhaustive studies measuring cognitive ability, SAT scores, CRT scores, need for cognition, and then tested susceptibility to the bias blind spot. And the finding that changes everything is this: cognitive sophistication does not reduce the bias blind spot. In fact, out of 28 different cognitive biases Stanovich tested, in 24 of them, higher cognitive ability was actually associated with a larger bias blind spot. Let me say that again because it is the core of this entire conversation. Smart people are not less biased. In almost every measurable way, they are more blind to their own biases. How is that mechanically possible? Because of what researchers call the justified reasoning account. When a highly intelligent person looks inward, they do not see bias. They see a long history of being right. They see their degrees, their awards, their successful track record. Their brain says, I am a rational, intelligent person, therefore the conclusion I just reached must be rational and objective. Their intelligence creates a sophisticated smokescreen. Think about it like a corporate firewall. A state-of-the-art cybersecurity system protecting a massive company. Impenetrable, operating at lightning speed, flawless execution. Except the owner secretly programmed it to delete any incoming message containing bad news, criticism, or opposing viewpoints. The system itself is brilliant, but the parameters are rigged. The smarter you are, the better your firewall is at keeping out the truth. This connects directly to what researcher Maggie Toplak, one of Stanovich's collaborators, calls my-side bias, the tendency to evaluate evidence, generate arguments, and test hypotheses in a way that is biased toward your own prior opinions. And Toplak's research confirms that intelligence offers zero protection against it. Zero, because intelligent people fail at what the research calls decoupling. Discoupling is the cognitive act of separating your prior beliefs and emotional attachments from the logical structure of an argument. It is the ability to say, I despise this politician, but the economic policy they just proposed is mathematically sound. Or, I love this theory, but this new data completely invalidates it. It requires immense cognitive control. But highly intelligent people often use their processing power not to decouple, but to rationalize. They use their massive System 2 engine to build incredibly complex, sophisticated justifications for why their System 1 emotional intuition was correct all along. Think about the difference between a public defender and a $1,000 an hour corporate litigator. The public defender might simply say, my client is innocent. The high IQ brain will bury you in 5,000 pages of legal precedent, loopholes, and rhetorical gymnastics to prove the same thing, regardless of whether their client actually has the murder weapon in their pocket. The tragedy is that the brain is doing this to itself. It is deceiving its own host. Now I want to bring this to life with a story from the research that is genuinely disturbing. The FBI Madrid bombing fingerprint disaster. Because if you want to see the world's most elite, highly trained experts completely fail to decouple their expectations from the data, this is the case study. In 2004, there was a horrific terrorist bombing on the commuter train system in Madrid, Spain. Investigators found a plastic bag containing detonators near the scene. And on that bag was a single partial fingerprint. The Spanish authorities shared the print with Interpol and the FBI. The FBI put their absolute best people on it, the latent print unit, the specialists of fingerprint analysis. They ran the partial print through their massive database, the AIS. The computer generated 20 possible matches. The experts began manually examining those matches and zeroed in on candidate number 4, an American lawyer named Brandon Mayfield, living in Oregon. Now Mayfield is a convert to Islam, and he had defended individuals in court who had terror connections. So immediately a narrative begins to form. the System 1 intuitive story clicks into place. This guy fits the profile. The lead examiner looks at the Madrid print and Mayfield's print side by side. He finds 15 points of similarity. He declares it a 100% verified match. Then a second senior examiner reviews it. 100% match. A third examiner, a unit chief, reviews it. 100% match. They even bring in an external independent expert. He looks at the prints and agrees. A completely airtight consensus among the highest level fingerprint experts on the planet. Mayfield is arrested. He is facing the death penalty. But there is a catastrophic problem. Mayfield had not left the United States in a decade. He did not even have a valid passport. It was physically impossible for him to have left that fingerprint in Madrid. 2 weeks later, the Spanish authorities caught the actual bomber, an Algerian national named Ounane Daoud. His print was an exact, undeniable match. So how did 4 of the top fingerprint experts in the world see a 100% match where there was not one? Were they corrupt? Were they lying? No, they were victims of my side bias and a complete failure to decouple. Later investigations into the FBI's failure revealed a textbook case of the intelligence trap in action. Once the first examiner saw Mayfield's profile and made the initial match, his brain locked in. The narrative was set. When he looked at the microscopic ridges of the fingerprints, his brain actively ignored the glaring discrepancies and hyper-focused on the similarities. He was using his immense expertise to construct a justification for his intuition. And the other examiners fell prey to the same thing, compounded by the authority of the first examiner. They did not decouple the evidence from the context. They knew the lead examiner thought it was Mayfield. They knew Mayfield's background, so their brains filtered everything else out. Their highly trained, massively powerful cognitive engines worked furiously to bend reality to fit the narrative. It was not that they lacked expertise, it was their entrenched automatic expert behaviors that made them completely oblivious to the warning signs staring them in the face. They were so smart they talked themselves out of basic physics. The fact that a man cannot be in 2 places at once, that is the essence of motivated reasoning. Intelligence does not seek the truth, it seeks to win the case for your pre-existing beliefs. Now so far we have been talking about individual minds, individual traps, but what happens when you put a room full of highly intelligent, highly educated people together? Does a group of geniuses balance each other out, or does it multiply the trap? The answer is uncomfortable. Putting a bunch of incredibly smart people in a room together often creates a localized black hole of rationality. We routinely mistake the presence of smart people for the presence of smart thinking. The England national football team losing to Iceland in the 2016 Euro tournament is the perfect illustration of this. It is beyond an upset. England is the birthplace of modern football. They had a squad packed with global superstars, players earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a week playing for the biggest clubs in the world. Their combined talent was astronomical. Iceland, on the other hand, is a country with a population the size of a medium-sized English city. They had only had professional football infrastructure for about 2 decades. Their manager was literally a part-time dentist. And yet Iceland systematically dismantled England. Why? The research points to something called the too much talent effect. When you assemble a team of absolute superstars, whether they are athletes, Wall Street bankers, or politicians, ego and hierarchy take over. Every player on that English team was used to being the most talented person on the pitch. They all wanted to be the hero. They did not communicate. They did not collaborate. They actively undermined the collective strategy to showcase their individual brilliance. Iceland, lacking individual superstars, relied entirely on high-functioning group cohesion, strict adherence to a shared strategy, and relentless internal communication. They played as a single rational organism, while England played as 11 isolated geniuses, and they collapsed into what the research calls functional stupidity. Functional stupidity. It is a perfect phrase. So if the too much talent effect destroys elite groups, what is the antidote? How do you actually build a group that thinks well? This is where Philip Tetlock's super forecasting research and the Good Judgment Project come in. The intelligence community in the States, specifically ARPA, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, wanted to know how to predict geopolitical events more accurately. So they set up a tournament. They pitted thousands of highly trained intelligence analysts, people with classified clearances and decades of experience, against ordinary citizens in predicting complex global events. Things like, will North Korea test a missile by this date? Will the Greek economy default? And the results were humiliating for the experts. A specific group of ordinary citizens, whom Tetlock called super forecasters, consistently and significantly outperformed the elite intelligence analysts. People like Michael Story, a regular guy who liked reading the news, Doug Lorch, a retired computer programmer. These were not off-the-charts Mensa geniuses. They were beating the CIA at their own game. So what did they have that the experts did not? They were certainly above average intelligence. But what was genuinely off the charts was their RQ, their rationality quotient. They had specific practice methodologies for avoiding the intelligence trap. A dragonfly has compound eyes with thousands of individual lenses, allowing it to see in almost 360 degrees simultaneously. Super forecasters approach every problem the exact same way. Instead of analyzing an event through one ideological lens, purely economic, purely military, purely political, they deliberately force themselves to aggregate dozens of different perspectives. They engage in grueling point-counterpoint discussions. They actively seek out the smartest person who disagrees with them and genuinely try to inhabit that viewpoint before forming a conclusion. The second methodology is Fermatizing, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi. It is the process of breaking down a massive, seemingly unanswerable question into smaller, solvable proxy questions. If the question is, will there be another Korean War in the next 6 months? That question is too big. Your System 1 brain will just guess based on how alarming the news felt this morning. A super forecaster Fermatizes it. They ask, what are the necessary preconditions for a war to begin? We would need to see a spike in cyber attacks on South Korean infrastructure, a specific movement of artillery near the DMZ, measurable shifts in diplomatic rhetoric at the UN. They break the impossible question into a cluster of observable, trackable probabilities. Now I want to push back on this for a second because it sounds exhausting. Breaking down every major issue into 30 sub-questions, constantly arguing against yourself, constantly aggregating opposing viewpoints. How do super forecasters sustain the grit required to do this consistently without burning out? That question leads directly to the core trait that separates them from everyone else. Super forecasters do not view their beliefs as treasures to be guarded. They view them as hypotheses to be tested. Their identity is not tied to being right initially. Their identity is tied to being the fastest person to update their model when new information arrives. That single shift in identity is everything. And it leads us directly into the most philosophically unsettling concept in this entire book, meta-forgetfulness, the trap within the trap. Meta-forgetfulness is what happens when you are operating on highly complex, outdated mental models and you do not even realize the world has changed around you. You are running yesterday's map at full cognitive speed, completely convinced it is current. Now the research on actively open-minded thinking, what Stanovich calls AOT, gets to the heart of how genuinely difficult it is to update those models. A quick note before we go further. Some of the studies here examined how people revise deeply held beliefs around politics and religion. We are sharing this purely as data. The researchers were not interested in the content of the beliefs. They were interested in the mechanism of revision, whether the brain can actually update a core model when confronted with contradictory evidence. What Stanovich and his team found is that genuine belief revision is incredibly rare, even among highly intelligent people. When confronted with undeniable, high-quality evidence that contradicts a core belief, the vast majority of people simply refuse to update. They deploy their intelligence to dismiss the evidence, discredit the source, or rationalize a workaround. They get trapped in meta-forgetfulness. The intelligence that built the model is the exact same intelligence currently defending it against reality. And this creates what forecasters call the updating dilemma, the Sculler and Charybdis of forecasting. On one side, you have the danger of underreacting to new information, stubbornly clinging to your old model while the world shifts underneath you. On the other side, you have the danger of overreacting, panicking at every new data point, constantly overhauling your worldview based on a single news article, which is just as inaccurate, just in a different direction. The research highlights Tim Minto here, another super forecaster who won the tournament. Minto was a master of the middle passage. He did not ignore new information, but he also did not rebuild his entire worldview every time something new arrived. If a new piece of data came in, he would adjust his probability estimate by maybe 2 or 3%, a meticulous, incremental updater. He defeated the trap of meta-forgetfulness by turning belief revision into a continuous, low-level background process rather than a catastrophic, ego-destroying event. Now bring this directly to your own life. Think about the mental models you operate on every single day, how your industry works, how your relationship functions, what your personal strengths and weaknesses actually are. When did you build those models? 5 years ago? 10 years ago? The terrifying thing about meta-forgetfulness is that you cannot feel the gap between your model and reality. There is no alarm bell that sounds when your assumptions expire. You just keep operating at full speed, with total confidence until the crash happens. Now, this is where I want to offer an honest critique of the book itself, because Robson spends 3 meticulously researched chapters describing a structural flaw that makes skyscrapers collapse. The diagnosis is devastating. The intelligence trap is a genuine, measurable, pervasive disease of the mind. But then the solutions section arrives, and simply handing people a list of reminders to be more open-minded is not a cure. Awareness of the trap is only step 1. So let me give you the actual toolkit, the specific cognitive tools the research identifies for building that steering wheel and increasing your RQ. Tool number 1, moral algebra. During the grueling 1787 Constitutional Convention, Franklin watched the smartest men in America deadlock themselves completely because of their own entrenched biases, so he developed a method. When facing a massive polarizing decision, you take a piece of paper and divide it in 2. Pros on one side, cons on the other. Sounds like basic middle school advice, but here is the crucial twist. Franklin insisted that you must spend the most time, the most cognitive energy, on the side you do not want to win. You force your powerful System 2 engine to operate on behalf of the opposition. You build the strongest possible case for what you desperately hope is not true. It is a force mechanism for decoupling. It structurally interrupts the defense lawyer before the defense lawyer can get going. Tool number 2, your emotional compass, what neuroscientists call interoception. And I want to set this up with a story that seems completely contradictory to everything we have covered today. Ray Kroc, the man who built the McDonald's empire. Early in the company's history, Kroc was looking at a real estate deal. All of his lawyers, all of his financial advisors, every smart person in the room looked at the spreadsheets and said, "Do not do this deal. The numbers do not work." Kroc listened to them. Then he tapped his elbow and said, "My funny bone says we do the deal." He did it, and it became one of the most lucrative decisions in corporate history. Now I know what you are thinking. We just spent the last 40 minutes absolutely dismantling System 1 intuition. We said that relying on your gut is what caused Archie Cochrane to nearly misdiagnose himself to death. So why are we suddenly telling you to trust your funny bone? Here is the vital distinction. Ray Kroc's funny bone was not a magical, mystical premonition. It was what neuroscientists call interoception, the brain's ability to perceive physical sensations arising inside the body. What was actually happening to Kroc was the firing of somatic markers. Throughout his entire career, Kroc had negotiated thousands of real estate deals. His non-conscious mind had accumulated a massive database of tacit knowledge, tiny, unquantifiable patterns of human behavior, tone of voice, market conditions, timing. His System 1 brain was processing real data, just faster than his conscious mind could articulate it. When he sat at that table, his non-conscious mind recognized a highly profitable pattern that the spreadsheets missed. It could not send a memo to his conscious brain, so it generated a physical sensation instead, a tightness in the chest, a feeling in the elbow. The difference between lazy cognitive bias and highly tuned interoception is the depth of the tacit knowledge underneath it. Rationality is not about suppressing all emotion and acting like a robot. True evidence-based wisdom is about reflective thinking, the ability to pause, recognize the somatic marker, and ask yourself honestly, is this feeling coming from a lazy bias, or is it a signal from my deep experiential database? Intuition is not the enemy. Unexamined intuition is the enemy. Tool number 3, the outside view versus the inside view. When we evaluate a situation, a business venture, a political crisis, a personal decision, we almost always take the inside view. We look at the highly specific, unique details of our particular situation. We tell ourselves, my startup is different because our product is better and our team is hungrier. The intelligence trap convinces you that your specific details override general reality. The outside view forces you to anchor to base rates before you ever look at the specifics. If you want to assess whether a specific threat will materialize in a region, before you look at the current intelligence or the political climate, you must ask, historically, what is the base rate of this kind of event in this exact region over the last 50 years? You anchor your expectations to historical reality, not to your intuitive narrative. If 90% of startups in your sector fail within 2 years, your base rate of failure is 90%. You can adjust that number upward based on your inside view specifics. But you cannot ignore the gravitational pull of the base rate. Super forecasters live and die by base rates. It prevents the brain from running away with an emotional narrative before the data even gets a seat at the table. Now let's zoom all the way out. Because everything we have covered today, every study, every case, every catastrophic failure, it is not really just about IQ tests or sports upsets or fingerprint analysis. It is about a foundational story that Western culture has been telling itself since the Enlightenment. The story that intelligence is purely protective, that the higher your IQ, the more books you read, the higher the degree you earn, the closer you automatically get to reliable, objective truth. The research we have unpacked today dismantles that story completely. Intelligence is a neutral multiplier. It can multiply your ability to find the truth, or it can multiply your ability to deceive yourself with breathtaking sophistication. Which direction it goes depends entirely on the character of the person wielding it. And here is what cuts deepest. As a culture, we almost never celebrate the habit of doubting yourself. Think about our political debates, our corporate boardrooms, our media ecosystem. We treat changing your mind as a profound weakness. We treat saying, I thought I was right, the data shows I was not, let me revise my model, as a failure of character. And yet the data from Stanovich, from Tetlock, from Robson, all point to the same conclusion. That exact habit, actively open-minded thinking, and continuous belief revision is the only thing that genuinely defends against the intelligence trap. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. Harry Houdini, the man who spent his entire life proving that brilliant, educated people could be fooled by cheap parlor tricks. He wrote books about it. He testified before Congress about it. He was the most qualified human being on the planet to see the trap coming from a mile away. And yet, in his grief over the death of his mother, he fell directly into it. His massive cognitive engine went to work defending his desperate desire to believe in seances, in spiritualism, in the possibility of contact with the dead. He thought the trap was for other people. He thought his lifelong skepticism made him immune. So let me speak directly to you now. The intelligence trap is not a test of how smart you are. It is a test of whether you believe, truly and deeply believe, in the moments that actually count, that you are capable of being completely wrong right now, about the thing you are most certain of, your politics, your professional expertise, your judgment of the people closest to you. Are you sure? Because the smartest people in every single study we covered today were absolutely sure. The moment you feel certain, is the exact moment the trap closes. Now let me leave you with one final thought to sit with as you go about your day. We have spent this entire episode talking about how we trap ourselves, how our own internal biology and psychology work against us. But think about the algorithms feeding you information right now, on your phone, on your feed, in your inbox. If your own intelligence acts as a highly paid defense lawyer, using its immense power to protect your pre-existing beliefs, what happens when the technology you use every single day is explicitly designed to serve as that defense lawyer's paralegal? What happens when the algorithm's only job is to hand you the exact evidence that proves you right and bury everything that proves you wrong? How do you practice Benjamin Franklin's moral algebra when the paper you are writing on is already filled in before you even pick up the pen? That is the ultimate modern test of the rationality quotient. Good luck out there.